welcome to the RPO Expert Panel, a webinar program hosted by the Recruitment Process Outsourcing Association. I'm Lamis Abulrahma, CEO at the RPO. We are celebrating our 20th anniversary this year. The RPO is the leading membership organization serving the RPO ecosystem and educating the marketplace about RPO. The association launched in 2005, and this webinar program, started in 2012. So it's been a long time, covering many topics in RPO and talent acquisition. We heard from many amazing speakers. A topic we haven't covered until our annual conference in 2024 is the topic of mergers and acquisition for RPO businesses. And I want to thank Joe Marino, one of today's panelists and an RPO advisory board member, for suggesting the topic and helping us develop the content. Today, we'll be learning about mergers and acquisition for RPO business, especially for first-time sellers. We've got a lot to cover today, and I'm excited to hear from our panelists. So let me introduce our esteemed panel. First up, Matt Corbett. He's president at ZRG Embedded Recruiting. He's a serial entrepreneur and has spent his life in recruiting and talent search. The first company Matt founded grew to 500 employees and was sold to a public company. And after a decade in executive search, he joined Google and later launched an RPO business based on his experience there. That company was acquired by ZRG in 2023. Welcome, Matt. How accurate was that? Did I miss anything?
Yeah, thanks, Lamise. That was great. Lovely to join you. Thanks very much.
Where are you joining us from? And a fun fact about you, if you
I'm just outside of Boston. And fun fact, there isn't an animal my wife won't rescue. In fact, 2 nights ago, we just rescued our 8th Great Dane. So lots and lots of animals.
Sounds good. Love that.
Thank you.
Next, I want to welcome Jay Crabb, Managing Director at Canaccord Genuity. He is the Managing Director in the Technology and Services M&A practice at Canaccord. He has 15 years of experience as an investment banking advisor to middle market businesses on closed transactions, accumulating billions of dollars in enterprise value. Canaccord is a publicly traded global investment bank with nearly 3,000 employees and more than 1.8 billion in revenue. Welcome, Jake. Where are you joining us from?
Thanks, Lamis. Thrilled to be here. Appreciate you having me on your program. I'm in Chicago, Illinois, and excited to join.
You want to share a fun fact about?
Sure. I think I was more interesting earlier in my life than I am today, but probably one of the more adventurous things I've done is I went solo backpacking through Rwanda in 2019, which was an incredible experience that hopefully informs some of my experiences today.
Well, that's amazing. Thank you for sharing that. And last but not least, Joe Marino, Chief Growth Director at Human. Joe is responsible for M&A at Human People Solutions, along with his other responsibilities as Chief Growth Officer. He has been involved in transactions that have collectively exceeded over $600 million in purchase price. Human has completed 2 transactions in the last 13 months. Joe was part of the team that self-represented themselves when they partnered with private equity in December of 2022. Welcome, Joe. Where are you joining us from?
Hi, Lamis. I'm coming to you all from Albuquerque, New Mexico, and I'll share my fun fact. So I'm definitely an endurance junkie, but somehow I also have been blessed or cursed with a love for adrenaline. So I love to go fast on mountain bikes, road bikes, 50 plus miles an hour is pretty common for me, screaming down hills, and I'll do the same on a snowboard. The fastest I've ever gone is 56 miles an hour, and I do track it on my phone because I'm also with the numbers.
Amazing. Well, we're glad that you have time for us and happy to have you here today. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, Joe, and welcome the panelists. When you're ready, I can have my slide up.
Sure. Yeah. So I'll kick this off. So today we are going to talk about M&A and really focus on the first-time sellers. The information we'll share today and the panel will share will be applicable for most transactions and most individuals that are selling a business or part of selling a business or even acquiring a business, but we will focus on sort of that first-time seller. Lamise, if you can share the show, sort of the 8 steps that myself and Matt and Jake put together as the main force of the main 8 steps that happen throughout the buying cycle or the selling cycle. And it starts with sort of why you sell, and then it goes all the way to what happens after you've sold the business. And if you look at this, if you've transacted before or thought about transacting in the past, you may see some steps on here that you haven't thought about. All right, so we're going to walk through the first 5 steps today. So why sell your business, understand your business, know what you want, engaging and sort of pre-selling. We may go into selling if we have time. And then there's sort of that post-close part of the transaction and integration. And today we're going to share with you what you should be doing if you are ever going to sell your business, and start thinking about in advance what are the key components in your business and how you position things and how you think about your strategy in the near term, midterm, and long term to be able to have a successful outcome and partner with the right organization that you choose. Most of the time, from my experience, we find sellers spend a little bit of time preparing, but they don't actually spend enough time thinking about what is ahead of them. And there's some reasons for that, and we're very hopeful that today we'll be able to provide some insights to be able to avoid some of those pitfalls and again, to allow you to have a great outcome, whatever that is for you. And so I'll start by talking about the first step, which is why are you going to sell your business? So if you're an entrepreneur, you may have some partners, you may not, you may have some investors. It's important to understand, why are you selling, right? Are you looking to sell your business to de-risk, sort of take chips off of the table? Are you in sort of retirement mode and you don't want to run that business in the long term? Are you looking to do some of those things, but in combination also make sure your people are taken care of, or that your leaders can actually move and advance their careers, right? And so Matt, I'll go to you and share with us and everyone that's listening, from your experience, what have you done when you've decided why to sell, and what recommendations would you give to others when they're thinking about going through the process for the first time?
So I think the why you sell is a very, very personal story for most people, especially most entrepreneurs. I think the first business we had, it was just because the money was right, the timing was right. There weren't very many companies doing what we do, and so the multiplier was really attractive. And it was a lot of good lessons there, because we'd learned the hard way that just the highest purchase price isn't necessarily the best buyer. And so there's a lot of lessons we learned in that process. We did a better job on the second time, because in the second time we didn't just think about necessarily sort of our requirements, but more of what more assets can we bring to our clients. And I think the biggest lesson we learned was that when you're on the sales side, you tend to think a lot about, what do I want as a business owner to transaction my business? Whereas you should think more about, what does the buyer want on the acquisition side of the transaction? And how can you grow faster? How can you use assets they may have within their business to accelerate more? It's more about thinking of this as a beginning of a new chapter, and how can you accelerate growth, which is what they're looking for, versus simply the end of your chapter and how you can perhaps sunset. So a sunset scenario decreases the value. So look for acceleration by a combination of assets rather than the end of something.
Great, thanks, Matt. And I'll sort of piggyback onto that. If you said that it is a personal, I like how you said that it's a personal decision and a personal dialogue that you have with people closest to you to determine why you're selling or if you should sell. But there are, I don't know what the number is, but there's probably 6 or 7 sort of categories in total of why people sell, right? And so you're not alone. I know, Jake, you have a lot of experience working with groups and can always point someone in the right direction. Do you have a view on that, Jake, on, from your experience, the most common reasons why people sell, or some other thoughts just for the first-time sellers?
Yeah, for sure. It's similar. I agree in the way that Matt put that. It's very personal for each business owner and each company, right? It is the decision to formally engage in these processes or kind of formally explore these opportunities with potential partners is this intersection of personal objectives and also professional and corporate objectives inside the company itself, right? You can want to retire, but if the business isn't ready and it isn't the right fit for the right partner, it may not lead to the best outcome. And so it's oftentimes lining up and taking the time to prepare for these things to line up in advance of, is it the right time for me and my team? Is it the right situation personally from a wealth perspective or from a taking chips off the table? Is the market right and ripe for where the business is headed and who the right partners are to fully kind of capture the value of what you've created at that time? And so that can be, maybe there's an inflection point in the business, and capital or partnership or some sort of board level expertise would help accelerate that in a way that you couldn't do on your own. It could be any number of things, but it's just being thoughtful and finding a circle of kind of a trust circle of advisors around you to help you think through that timing as well. But it is that intersection of all those things.
Yep. Great, great. Yeah, and I've had similar experiences, Jake, with as being a seller and then also being on the buy side. What I've seen is typically you won't have more than 3 major objectives of the reason why you're selling. If you have 4 or 5, hone those in, because then you're trying to solve for a lot of different things, right? Are you trying to de-risk and get the highest valuation? Are you looking to retire and you want to make sure the business is sustainable? Are you passing that business down to a family member that's in the business but can't drive it to the next level, right? Are you worried about where technology is going, right? It could be a combination of those things. For us, when we partnered with private equity in 2022, one of the 3 objectives we had was we had more than 10 people that were on our cap table that had significantly less than 1% ownership. And we wanted them to increase their position on the cap table, which means we had to partner with the right organization to be able to do that. Not every buyer is interested in having more people be shareholders. It easily weeded out of who we were talking about. That was one of the top 2. We had 3, but it was one of the top 2 for us. So if you get to that point, talk to people about it, hone in on those, and it can change, by the way, right? You may be thinking about selling today, and then 3 years from now, you're 3 years older, and you have a family event that happens, and now you change the desire of where you want to be with your family, et cetera, and that drives your desire to partner with them. All right, let's go on to sort of knowing your business. And Matt, I'll start with you. So when you think about the positioning that you mentioned before, right? How do you really understand your business so that when you're going to a potential buyer, you can articulate what is the business that you actually have and what is the business that you see growth happening in, and it's going to be progressing to a different stage in the next 6 months to 24 months. Can you talk a little bit about that, Matt?
Yeah, I think for a lot of people, they think, oh, I know my business, but just knowing your business is a lot more complex than that. I think you have to understand your business in terms of what your trajectory could be in the next 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, 24 months, and how the landscape is going to change for your business. The assets that you have and how you're going to grow those versus the assets you don't have, and whether you should add those in through an acquisition or whether you can organically build them or buy them yourself. Like, I think knowing your business in context to your marketplace and knowing your business in context to your competitors is really, really important, because it's that context to your marketplace competitors that will drive who is a potentially good acquirer. And having that listed out and thought through and spent research and looked into that provides a lot of clarity in terms of who may be a potential acquirer. And on their side, if they've seen that you've thought this through, spent a lot of time researching, positioning your business, they know that you're a thoughtful, mindful business partner who could accelerate your business with some of the assets or capital that they've got.
Great. And Matt, I'm going to ask you a clarifying question.
Yeah.
So when you first sold, well, just like when you first sold your first business, if you were today to identify and describe what that business was, would your description today look different than what it was when you sold it as a first-time seller?
Yeah, I think it would. I think at the time we were just in hyper growth mode because of the internet, professional services, recurring revenue. I think that would remain the same. But I think looking back now, we would probably have a much more global perspective on the business and have a much deeper understanding of the multipliers of revenue, the potential for the business to expand into other categories that we didn't realize at the time. Um, and I think those are honestly, there's two ways you can get that knowledge. You can either do it through the school of hard knocks, which we did, or you can just go and get a really good financial advisor, business advisor, deal advisor who can give you perspective and insight that you don't necessarily have when you're in the hole of just heads down building your business.
Yeah, it's hard to pick your head up when you're thinking about
Yeah.
every single customer that you're working with, your employees, the challenges, running the business back office. Jake, do you have thoughts on this?
Yeah, it's always interesting to me when we're working with first-time sellers how sort of eye-opening an external perspective is on their business, right? So much of like you've created this amazing product and you have all these great customers and when you dig into it and I've got to go articulate to a group of investors or buyers, all of the things that make the customer profile great, the revenue quality of the products, the go-to-market motion, the control environment of the business, right? And all of that stuff, a lot of times for a private business owner, is up here, right? It's not necessarily on paper. It's not a set of KPIs or a push button report that spits out of an ERP system, which is ultimately what is required to tell that story to an investor or an external third party, right? So helping to think about know your business seems kind of obvious on the surface, but it's really about do you have are you able to articulate and provide data and support to what makes it great at each of these levels? That helps with successful outcomes for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, and when I think about sort of knowing your business on my end, so I talk to at least two sellers every single week. I was talking to a group not that long ago. They're in the hourly recruitment business, so RPO on an hourly basis. And they described their business to us, and their business was described as they had a sourcing component, they had a full recruitment component, they had a combination where they did both, and then they had just sort of list building. And they described all four of those services equally in the first half hour of a 1 hour conversation. And when I asked them what's the percentage mix of revenue, 90% of the business was in sourcing.
Mhm.
And they just spent 25 minutes talking about the other two service lines that as a buyer, I'm not going to place value on because it's such a small percentage of the business. And so that's sort of my recommendation is when like to know your business, truly know what you may have a lot of different things. You may do consulting, MSP, RPO, staffing, executive search, direct hire, contingent search, and you may even have some nice names for those businesses when you go to market. But when you're communicating that to a potential buyer, you want to be really clear. It doesn't matter if it's ABC widget, fancy name company or service line. If it's RPO, call it RPO to them. Have a branding conversation in your go-to-market strategy, but be really simple so they can understand that and get to the point of this is where the business is today. This is where most of the revenue and the earnings come from. This is where there's upside opportunity. Or in some cases, if you're rolling out some AI, if you're using some other tech, and the tech isn't monetized right now, you're not actually selling it, and someone is paying you for it. Don't spend a lot of time on it because when the buyer comes and looks at your financials and values your business, you're not a tech company. They're not going to put a lot of value in that unless it has been monetized or you have some case studies where your customers are using it and it could be monetized. But stay focused on what's going to drive value versus sort of the fringe. That's my perspective. Matt, I'd love your sort of view on that.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. I think that for a first-time seller, it's also looking at revenue concentration. So spend time looking at who are your customers and how long have they been customers? Has their revenue gone up over time? How have you been able to land and expand and penetrate within that customer and add other services? So you've got revenue distribution. You don't want to be too concentrated in one customer, but you want to make sure you've got repeatability and scalability within a handful of customers. And then looking at your contracts, making sure you've got MSAs and POs for those companies. So it's revenue that you can contractually prove, that it's repeatable. Like these basic blocking and tackling is incredibly important.
Yeah. Yeah, the contracting piece is sort of near and dear to my heart. We made some decisions as an RPO company a little over 10 years ago to have some terms in place with our customers that were pretty aggressive and favorable in our favor, that ended up being very valuable to our eventual suitor.
Mm-hmm.
And we didn't really know that at the time. And those were tough conversations, and we tried it and it stuck with most of our clients. And it led to us having a very large contracted backlog, meaning 80% of our revenue is predictable for the next 12 months. There's a lot of value in that. Not all of our RPO peers are in that position, especially if you're getting paid hourly, excuse me, getting paid on a per rec and a success fee basis. But you can be aggressive with your terms with your customers that maybe half of them accept it and they don't really read it. And in a downside scenario, it actually helps you. Meaning if they give notice, they still have to pay you something for a significant period of time, which means they're not just going away and you're losing revenue day one or 30 days later, because that's often a risk. Jake, your thoughts?
The risk tolerance as an entrepreneur is very different in a lot of these features versus like an institutional investor that's a fiduciary over, LP capital, right? So, things like customer concentration, things like bona fide paper contracts with your largest customers, right? These are things that, we all have a ton of respect for the scrappiness of the entrepreneur that's building this business and can tolerate, not necessarily having a formal contract or can tolerate, a 60 or 70% customer, but an institutional investor may see that as binary risk. So being able to clean those, this is part of the preparation phase of the process, is if you can clean some of this stuff up in advance of it, it just creates a ton of value and makes the process a lot smoother when you do go through it formally.
Yeah, great. Yeah. And Jake, how long in advance of when someone really is looking to go to market, right? Engage potential buyers, maybe engage someone like your group to represent them. How long do you think it takes them to prep to be ready? It's not 30 days, but what's your view? How long does that take?
It's very situational. The answer to all these questions is always going to be it depends. So I'll preview that in advance, but it I would say formally. So if I get hired today, the amount of time it takes to write the materials and prepare clean sets of financials, do quality of earnings and anything, that can be as short as a month. But if you want to clean up some of the, make sure that your control environment is a place where you can produce the data to support the process and get through diligence without it totally overwhelming the organization. If you want to, get, reviews or audits, or think about the back office functions that support those features of the business, you can do that. It's never too early to start thinking about this stuff. So it's anywhere from, years to months to clean up some of this stuff.
Yeah. Matt, did you have a thought on that, on the timing?
I'm just smiling because like you can't start this too soon.
Yeah.
So I think the company we sold Hub to ZRG, this topic came up in the first conversation we ever talked about building a business in 2010, and we ended up selling it in November of 2022. So like the sooner this conversation is had, and you think about the length of the business, building a business that is sellable is really important. And the sooner you have that conversation, the better off you are at the end. Like pivoting the business to different types of revenue streams for an exit a year before the exit is too late.
Too late. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I completely agree with you, Matt. Yeah, on our side, I'll give you sort of two examples with us. We didn't really prep when we sold our staffing business in 2016. We did some prep sort of a year before. We were in a white hot market, and so it didn't really matter that much. We could have maybe, extracted a little more value if we did some planning, but the market was just so hot it didn't really matter. But we learned, and when we went to market in December of 2022, knowing we were going to partner with private equity, we had planned a good 20 months before that, and our plan was 2.5 years to go to market, and the market, with the tailwinds, allowed us to go to market sooner. And so we were scrambling a little bit, and we had planned reorganization changes, so putting people in the right positions that could present externally, hiring some external folks, being cautious of investing too much in certain areas because we knew that would hurt our EBITDA and our earnings. But at the same time, we were sort of ready to go, and we had a lot of things lined up. We did learn along the way, though, and we had gone through a transaction not that many years earlier. Okay, good. Let's go into
The
the
audience,
project.
I guess one other point that I'd make is like the audience shouldn't feel like if you don't have audits or if you don't have a CFO, then you won't be successful. It's more put it in the bucket of what are the things that I can control to create the optimum outcome when it is the right time, right? So it's certainly it is a factor, right? All these things are factors in the sort of total picture and their valuation implications in total, and structural implications in totality, but what are the things that I can control or do in advance that really help optimize the process? These are those.
Yep, great. And I'll say one other point on that that's kind of separate. It's related to your customers. So normally, if you're a founder, you're part of the C-suite, you're an owner, you're going to have that C-suite have strong relationships with their largest clients. But I have seen recently where that hasn't been the case, where some of the main client relationships are sitting down sort of two levels, and those people are not in conversations with the potential buyer. If you're the CEO and you're going to stay, or if you're a founder and you're going to stay, or if your CFO and COO are going to stay with the business after you exit, make sure that those top 2 or 3 people know your main customers, because you will, unless you have very, very low concentration, those customers will get called in the process of diligence. And so if you, as Mr. or Mrs. CEO, know them, you can reach out to them and know them well. You can reach out and maybe give them a little insight on this is happening. Can you talk a little bit earlier in the process because you're sort of under the tent to trust them? You can't build that trust with a client in 6 months. It takes a while to do that. That's one thing that I've seen people sort of stumble on recently. They're empowering their team members to own those relationships, but at some point you do want to sort of take a look back, get to that 20,000-foot level and say, where do I really need to lean in? And if you've got 5 large customers, make sure you have a relationship with them. Go visit them. Go talk to them. Good.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Matt.
Sorry, I just wanted to say one thing. Years and years ago, a guy said to me, an advisor that we had, he said, make sure you run a business that's sellable. So like always think about run a business that has value, run a business that at any point in time, if a buyer appeared out of nowhere, that you're ready. You're ready all the time. So it basically means sort of running solid operations, decent financial planning, basic plumbing of the business. Like just run it. So at any given time, opportunistically, if a buyer shows up, you've got the pieces in place. So it's sellable. Just deciding one day that I want to sell my business in 6 months, you're probably not going to get as good value as if you run a business that's sellable at any time.
Yeah, and be genuine about that, right? Because you can't fake it. It's going to come out in diligence if you're faking it on the front end of the conversation.
100%.
All right, so let's talk about sort of desired outcomes. So the third phase is know what you want, right? So we talked about why sell a business, understand your business, get ready, however long in advance before you're going to get prepared. So when we think about sort of know what you want, Jake, tell us from your experience, what are the best ways to set up for a favorable desired outcome that the seller is going to achieve and feel good about?
I'll tee this conversation up again, going back to right. What is a good outcome? How do we, or how does the private business owner, the owner entrepreneur, how do they think about what a good outcome looks like? And it goes back to those objectives, those personal, professional, corporate objectives, right? And then it's our job. What I do is on the front end. Okay, how do I construct a process that delivers those options, right? And that can take a few different forms. So there's any number of different transactional alternatives that may meet different types of objectives, right? So whether that's a private equity partnership where they're really coming in and backing the existing operating team. There's likely some combination of they're not necessarily buying 100% of the company and telling you to go to the beach, right? There's definitely this commitment to continue operating the business alongside them. And grow equity value together, right, during their hold period. Or it could be a strategic sale where it is, becoming part of a large organization, leveraging a big infrastructure to go, launch new products, build new technologies, get into new markets, and leverage that bigger company infrastructure to go do that in a way that's maybe more accelerated. But that's you're giving up 100% of the upside, and it probably shocker to no one. Some entrepreneurs don't make great employees. So that may not be exactly what you're looking for from a go forward operating role. So, work with your network, work with these, your circle of trust around you or advisors to identify what are those objectives and then what are the types of transactions that would deliver that.
Great. Matt, do you have thoughts?
I just think from our experience, just be brutally honest with yourself about what you want. Because, if you're acquired, the buyer wants you to be all in on the new business. They want your heart and soul to be in on growing the business. And so you have to be really honest with yourself in terms of, okay, what do you want for the next 4 or 5 years in your life? If you want to relax, or if you want to work twice as hard for a huge second bite at the apple in the future, like you just got to spend time with yourself and your family thinking that through and being honest with a buyer in terms of what they're getting for their money.
Yeah, being honest is important, right? Just distilling whatever your objectives are down to a small number and then go and try to achieve those.
Exactly.
On my side, I'll talk about just culture. Every organization, whenever you meet a company that is selling or is buying, okay, if you're a buyer or a seller, you're never going to hear, by the way, my culture is just mediocre. It's not very good, right? You're always going to hear my culture is great. It's positive. I want to make sure my people are taken care of post-transaction. But what does that really mean, right? Because the acquirer is going to say, yes, they want to have, they want to create a great experience for those employees. It's going to be something that you're most likely going to hear. But my suggestion is if that is something that you really care about, and you want to make sure that your employees are taken care of, because you may go with the transaction and maybe you're going to be there for a year or two, maybe you'll stay there for the long term, but either way, you as a seller are not going to be in control if you're doing a majority sale. And that's sort of what we've been sort of talking about, not talking about minority acquisitions on this call. For majority sale, you're not going to most likely be in control. And so if culture is important, what is the acquiring company going to do to make sure that your employees, who are now their employees, are engaged in a great manner and are going to create a great culture for them, right? And so ask that question, right? If that's important to you, have a couple of questions that you get into the weeds. What are you going to do? If it's a first-time acquirer, they may not know, right? They may say, we'll figure it out. Okay, well, that sounds a little risky. Tell me a little bit more about how you're going to figure it out, right? They may not know the answer at that point in time because they don't know enough about your business early on, but eventually they should have a plan right around before you're going to sign a letter of intent early on. Like they should know what that looks like. And I'll give you all an example. We closed on an acquisition a little over 3 weeks ago. It'll get now announced next week. And we knew that organization's health benefits plan renewed in July. And so we could have allowed them to renew under that plan for another year. We're on a calendar year basis. They were on a mid-year basis. And so we decided that we were going to bring them onto our health benefits July 1, which means they're going to hear about the acquisition and there's going to be a lot of activity that's happening. They just went through their open enrollment. Now they're going to go through it again. And so we had our HR team spend a lot of time on the front end thinking about that experience. We always send, when we hire a new employee, we send them a package that includes a bottle, like a small bottle of champagne and all niceties from our corporate office area, welcome package essentially. And we sent that to everyone. And then they all those packages, quote unquote, landed at the employee's desk or at home when they were going through the health and benefits orientation, which happened 2 days after the close happened. And so that created a favorable experience, even for those folks that health insurance was going to change. It was going to be more expensive. It's not always equal. And by the way, that's something you should be thinking about because health insurance costs are so high. Year-over-year premiums are gone up. If you're self-insured or you're fully insured, it's something you should be thinking about. A lot of acquirers don't think about that. And I was just early this week at a 2.5-day session focused on acquisitions and mergers and some other things around integration. And that was something that bubbled up across the board that people were missing out because they didn't think about that early on. So know what you want and go a couple of layers deeper to really figure out what are the details that are going to satisfy what you want.
And some of those, and one sort of point I'd just add on to that is some of those are going to be technical in nature in terms of like finding the fit and who the right partner and does the math work in delivering a transaction sort of value and structure that delivers that personal objective that you're looking for. But one of the things that there are very intentional milestones in a formal M&A process where we want our clients or sellers to have direct social interaction with the potential partners, right? Because these are it's very to the culture point, right? These are people you're going to be working with every day. It's very important that you kind of get a feel for who they are as people. And so we work hard to set those up to make sure that it's a great fit, because ultimately, foundational to any transaction that gets done between buyer and seller is a foundation of cultural alignment and ultimately trust, right? So we work hard to create that through different milestones in the process, whether it's via dinners prior to management meetings, right? So if you're going to sit in a conference room and talk about your business for 4 hours, let's break bread the night before, make sure that people get to know each other and that it feels like a good fit and a good outcome at the end.
Jake, when
Yeah.
you're involved in a process, right? So someone engages you, at what point, or do you ever have, before the transaction closes, do you have the sellers interact with the buyers without you or your team being present?
That can happen later in the process. So I would say, and we'll get into, not to sort of front run the discussion around what does a process structure look like, but I'll call it post LOI. So the last kind of the last stage of the process where you're typically exclusive with one, right? You've granted one party right of exclusive negotiations and you're charging ahead to a close. It's during some of those conversations when you're talking about management structures, how to build the board, what are the right incentive compensation packages, or how do I, if we're going to build a new sales team or we're going to make these investments, how do we do that as a team together, or developing a 100 days plan. All these different things, right, are potentially some of those ways where there's direct interaction between buyer and seller without us necessarily being there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. Yeah, appreciate you sharing that. Matt, go ahead.
Yeah.
Only that very often, though, there really isn't an opportunity for the buyers to interact with the entire leadership team of a company that's being acquired. And so that's when sort of the responsibility lands on the shoulders of the owners of the business to really, really go deep on the due diligence on the culture of the acquirer. Because if you miss that, you could have your entire leadership team turn over 6 to 9 months after the acquisition if the acquiring culture is completely different. And then a lot of the carried asset value in that acquisition just collapses. So I think the topic you bring up, Joe, in terms of culture assessment and spend time on that is incredibly important and sadly overlooked. Jake?
One other sort of weapon, I don't know if that's the right word, is reference checks.
Yeah.
So, and if you're going to go exclusive with somebody, ask for references. And if it's a private equity firm that's had successful investments and they're on multiple funds, they will happily introduce you to other founders and other operators of companies that they're working with, and have one-on-one private sessions with them and pick their brains. What is it like to work with these people? How is the cadence of interaction with them? Right? Those are great tools towards the end of the process to, again, just really validate that culture and fit.
Yeah.
I would say,
Good,
I would say what Jake just said is a requirement. Like if you're on the sell side, you have to do just as much due diligence as they're doing on you. And if they've done multiple acquisitions, you have to talk to those other acquisitions. And don't expect it all to be rosy and fantastic. Like speed bumps are okay. So long as you're learning from the speed bumps, they're fine.
Yeah, you'll be, from my experience, I was surprised in talking to sellers how honest they were, right? You don't want to have the acquiring company on the call. It needs to be a one-on-one, or it could be a couple people from the selling company with, the former founder, or if they're a senior leader and they're still there, they will tell you the truth because they want things to be better. They're going to give you favorable references, right? It's not going to be a negative reference, but you will get constructive feedback that you can go back and use to say, hey, so-and-so said this. Yes, we have addressed that, or no, we haven't. It's going to be a challenge, but now we know that you're aware of it. I was a bit surprised years ago when I started to hear founders actually sharing that honest experience, because most of them have exited, right? They've de-risked, so they're not really worried about being honest at that point, because they're not worried that their acquired company or the company they work for is going to do something negative. They ask them to be honest with them. If everything is glowing and there's nothing constructive, that's constructive feedback or something that's negative, you may want to be cautious of that, because a deal never goes perfect.
Agreed.
Great. So, so let's do sort of that engagement phase when now you're going to engage with sort of experts, right? So you've done sort of your pre-work, you've said, okay, you sat down for however long, you know your business, you really know what you want, right? What you're trying to achieve in the next 30 days or in the next 2 years, you know what that is. At some point, you're going to engage with some folks to help you, or you should. So Jake, I'll start with you. From your perspective, tell us how when should people engage with you? Are you the first point that they should be talking with? Should they be talking with other folks first? Give us your background, and Matt will have you comment.
For sure. So this is another area where it's never too early. And I'm certainly happy to have those conversations 5, 10, how many every years it makes sense to get the wheels turning in advance of a formal process or an engagement. Any of those advisors in your network would be happy to do that. So first off, it's never too early to start asking the questions. But it can be folks like myself in the M&A advisory business. It can be M&A attorneys or other sort of other attorneys that are familiar with the process, that have been through this with founders and private businesses in the past. It can be, wealth advisors or wealth management partners that have a bunch of clients that are private business owners. It can be folks from in this network for sure. Former, maybe sellers that have already gone through the process and getting their experiences and their recommendations, right? So use your network to and be vulnerable, right? Don't be afraid to ask questions. This is your first time going through it. So let these resources kind of guide you to the right places and take as long as you need. So it's never too early to start these conversations.
Matt?
I mean, two lessons learned for us. The first one was when you get an advisor, like listen to them. So the first one we had on the first sale to a public company, give us some advice around deal structure, and they were spot on. And so thank goodness we listened to him. And then this one with CRG, we actually went with this was the lesson learned, was pick a lawyer who's actually done similar deals.
Yeah.
So the actual lawyer that we used had done a previous M&A process with the same private equity acquirer. So although they were representing us, they understood the cadence and the level of due diligence and the language of the specific buyer. And it made such a huge difference in terms of just being able to understand the priorities and the requirements. And so that was the massive lesson learned here, is the type of deal is just as important as the actual lawyer you're picking. So a lawyer who does one type of law might be completely irrelevant to a M&A transaction if your buyer's private equity and the stage of their fund cycle. Like, this really matters. So I think, Jake, maybe you could jump into this because this is kind of your sweet spot.
100%. So of course, there are going to be cost implications to that, right? So a lot of private business owners that we talk to, just don't be penny wise and pound foolish. Think about it this way: your counterparty on the other side of this transaction is going to be represented by the biggest, most well-resourced, ton of experience, dedicated focus in M&A, advisory network and attorneys around them. You should have similar level of firepower. So work with a focused M&A attorney that knows their way around the contract. So chances are there are practice areas, there are fantastic mid-market law firms that go toe to toe with the largest law firms in the world on these deals and will represent you well. So work within those networks around, again, whether it's advisors or elsewhere, but make sure you have an M&A attorney.
Yeah. Yeah. And one of the things that we saw, this was December of 2023, we were close to transacting. We actually never consummated the transaction. And the seller he actually used an M&A attorney. We'll give him that. But the M&A attorney was a long-term friend. Mm-hmm. And the advice from the friend really impacted the seller emotionally, right? And I could see it in conversations. It was like, remember when we did that 20 years ago, right? When we were on the base, whatever it was, right? Like different places, right? And it skewed the transaction. It wasn't a smart consultant, attorney, financial advisor that was sort of arm's length. It's fine if you have a good working relationship, but if it's one of your really close friends, if they can't separate that, and it's really more the seller separating that from the consultant, it can actually skew the impact of that person who does have valuable advice. But be careful on that front. And they will probably give you a discount, right? And so it comes back to the investment, right? You can use them as an advisor on the side maybe, but bring someone in that can represent you and really be insulated from the past history and the emotional side of it. Matt, you're laughing.
It is such a good point. We had a deal where the seller, he sort of used a neighbor who was a lawyer. And he was a lawyer in a different category without particular experience in transactions within PE. And the lawyer absolutely killed the deal just because they didn't have sort of calm experience and expertise in the category, couldn't give the seller the sort of advice that he or she needed. So yeah, it's really important that you pick someone designed for the purpose, not your neighbor down the road who happens to be lovely.
Yep. Good. All right. So let's go through and talk about the types of consultants. I know we mentioned a bunch, but are there consultants that people should be talking to, or advisors, experts that they should be talking to? We touched on a financial advisor, obviously an attorney, someone who's maybe done a deal, other roles that can help people as they're sort of figuring out their connections and their networking and how they're going to start to engage the right groups to be potential acquirers.
Jake.
The other one that I'd throw out there is sort of in the trust and estate category, but also within the tax structuring realm on the corporate side. So if there are legal machinations to go through from an entity structure, convert to the right sort of type of corporation pre-close in a way that makes it super tax efficient for you and your family, do that work in advance. You don't want to be doing that, in the middle of a process or right before closing. Or if there's trust and estate things that you need to be doing for you and your family that make it more tax efficient when you do go to exit, do that now, right? Do that in advance. So those are two other ones that I'd mention. So it's sort of in the personal wealth planning and estate and trust side, and then also the tax structuring for the company itself.
Yeah, that's very smart. One thing back when I started in M&A back in 2002, it hasn't really changed, is something called structured charts that most folks that have not done a deal or are not attorneys won't understand what that is. It's easy to understand, but it's something that happens usually late in the process. All that is it's a flow chart essentially, and it shows sort of the legal entity or the legal entities that own your business, and then what entity or entities will be acquiring your business. And when you start to think about that in advance, it really, right, Jake, that has an impact in the tax implications, right? Most of the time, if you're doing a stock deal and the whole company is going to be acquired, then any equity that's rolled over into the new organization will ROLL, like the roll will be tax deferred, but not in all situations. It depends on what that entity is. So you may want to do something in advance to be able to switch the entity that owns the business before that happens, or at least go into the conversation, because when you sign a letter of intent, sort of going into the next process, when you sign a letter of intent, if that isn't considered, the acquirers may say, you didn't bring that up before, that's on you. You're going to have an unfavorable tax treatment because of this transaction. And you should have been able to bring that up earlier and negotiate that earlier before the letter of intent was signed.
We're not tax advisors or in any position to make recommendations on specific structures, but I can tell you that if with enough planning, if you work on this within years in advance of potential sale, it can be significant in terms of the implications on what the potential tax savings could be at closing. So work with those advisors in advance.
I think you're right. Like our deal 2.5 years ago, there was a tax lawyer in with the deal lawyer, and they were working together. It made a huge impact. Just their thoughtfulness and insightfulness through the process was worth its weight in gold.
Yeah, and having the right tax professional that has completed M&A transactions, it won't be that expensive. We're not talking weeks and weeks of work. They're just understanding your situation, giving you some advice, and then you sort of go and execute on that.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a good investment up front. Okay, so we have 10 minutes left. Let's talk a little bit about sort of the pre-process and understanding what buyers are out there. And so you can see we went through sort of why sell, know your business, know what you want. and then you're sort of engaging with the right experts. We also call it dating, right? That you're sort of getting out there. You also should be networking with your peers and potential buyers at that point, but just making connections. Now you go into the process, and the process can look and feel different, right? If you engage someone like Jake and his group, then you're going to be represented, and they may go out to the potential buyers in a different way. Jake, can you sort of describe what you see from your role? And then Matt, maybe you could do the same for what you've done in your career, and then I'll do the same, and then we'll be at the point to wrap up.
So when it's time to formally, pursue these processes, a lot of times, we go through kind of on the front end of gathering information, understanding objectives, and a lot of times it'll be gathering technical information, right? So financials and other documents from the company itself, and then preparing sort of this presentation of here's who we think could be the right partners. Here's preliminary thoughts on how to position the business or how we think the market will receive it. Here's what the process looks like, and that process can come with different structures, right? So everything that we do is going to be unique to the objectives of the client or the transaction, right? So sometimes that's, maybe it's a small, very targeted approach to a group of maybe strategics or existing private equity platforms that are acquisitive in the space, or maybe that's not of interest, and maybe you want to be the platform, and so we're going to platform private equity investors, of which there are many, right? So those different processes can look different, and so working on the front end to understand what those objectives are, and we come in with a recommendation or thoughts around how to structure that process, and so that's part of the pre-planning phase, is getting that formal sort of presentation from advisors on how to do what it could all look like, and timing, et cetera. And so once you're kind of through that and you're ready to pull the trigger, we think about and I don't want to go through the whole process. I don't think this is the right sort of section of the conversation for the whole M&A process. But from formal engagement to kind of launching into the market, it's really this preparation phase that can include, us gathering a bunch more information on the business. And a lot of times that'll be a big, data request list on different parts of the, different files and data and financial information that we need to put the marketing materials together. We're drafting those materials. In parallel, you're also working with those other advisors, right? So typically it's an accounting advisor or a tax advisor to do pre-sale quality of earnings work, or preparing sort of a presentation of the financials in a way that's, very credible and clean for the market. It can be some pre-process legal work, right? Getting, NDAs in place or those documents ready. So it's just formally taking a month or so, depending on timing. So if you're going right away, it can take, up to a month of just doing that preparation work of formally preparing all the documents and gathering all the information needed to go.
Great. Matt, do you have thoughts on just thinking about that pre-process and then also understanding the types of buyers that are out there?
Yeah, I think on the pre-process, I think a lot of sellers underestimate how much time it takes. Like, it is a full commitment. And so I think you have to give a lot of time. You have to spend time thinking about, can I afford in my day-to-day a second full-time job, which is preparing the business for sale and talking to buyers and working with lawyers and financial structure, and like it takes a lot. And especially if you're the business owner and you're the primary sales driver, you have to really think about, how am I going to manage both jobs simultaneously, structuring the business to sell it while keeping sales up, and not letting the 20 balls that an entrepreneur carries at any given time, not letting any of them drop. I think that the second thing is just the buyers, that they're not being a pain in the neck, but they're designed to ask you challenging questions. And you have to be ready to almost welcome challenging questions, buyers really getting into the business, digging deep, asking the hard questions. You have to be ready to accept those questions, welcome them, enjoy them, throw yourself into the process heart and soul. Like, it's not easy. It takes a lot of time, but the way you handle that process is how the buyer will assume you're going to handle the job. So welcome every question, welcome every challenge, welcome them digging into your business, because if that's the way they do diligence on you, that's the way they'll be as partners after the transaction.
Yeah, if they ask it. Oh, good, Jake.
I was to say, one of the things that a lot of operators that we work with will find is you really can't do this on your own. So a crossroads that a lot of business owners come to is, who within the company do I involve? Do I bring in under the tent to let them know that this process is taking place? Because one person, you as a business owner having a day job and running a company cannot do this on your own. So there are certain parts of the process in terms of gathering information and being responsive to all the requests that come in that may require certain other individuals to be involved, and of course we and use your advisor network around you to figure out how to communicate that and do that delicately in a way that doesn't disrupt the business, because ultimately you want it to continue on the same kind of growth trajectory that's the story that you're presenting, without disrupting operations or affecting services and delivery to customers, right? But also being responsive to everything that the process requires.
Yeah, that's great, Jake. When you were sharing your comments before, I wrote down something that says, let your employees surprise you. Right? There are leaders in your business that may not be under the tent, they may not be shareholders. Build some trust with them and let them know what's happening, because one, you're going to be hiding these types of discussions from them. They're going to know something's going on. Right? All of a sudden, you're normally available 6 hours a day between these hours,
Yep.
and you're not, right? And you have all these private meetings on your calendar. So figure out a way to have that, build that trust and bring some of those leaders in. It doesn't have to be on the front end, but it could be during the process. And then you'll be able to leverage them to be able to help with the diligence process. And then from a buyer's perspective, then they can get introduced to those folks and they can start to develop a relationship. So if the transaction happens, now you just don't have the founders telling how they love the acquiring, the leadership of the acquiring company. They can say that now we've got 3 vice presidents and 2 managers that have been involved in this process, and they have gotten excited about the way that we're going to move forward with the transaction.
And ultimately, depth of the team accrues to value.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So if you can demonstrate the depth of your leadership team, that this isn't there's key person risk within the business, that accrues to value.
Lamise, I know we have 3 minutes left. Can we go on one? We're not going to go on to the next stage because I think we accomplished what we wanted to accomplish today. Can I ask one other thing of Jake before we go?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. So Jake, you talked about a platform. You mentioned that. Can you describe for folks what is a platform, and when is there a gray area between a company actually being a platform and not being a platform?
For sure. So private equity is our institutional investors. They pool capital from other folks and make direct investments into private companies. And so when private equity is making a direct investment into a company, if that company is the platform, right? So there's no other investment sitting alongside it or plugging it into, like, that is the platform investment. It is, they're backing that individual company to be the leader of the story. Contrast that to a company that already has an investor and doing acquisitions within that company. So in certain aspects, behaving as though they are a strategic buyer, it may look a little bit different than the large strategic Coke or Pepsi acquisition. But it's different sort of application when there's an existing platform that is acquiring a business as an add-on acquisition, right? So the platform is a standalone business, a standalone investment.
Thank you, Jake. Matt, did you have anything to add on that topic? Otherwise, we'll wrap up.
No, it's a great topic. Just on the platform, our story, so RFE is the private equity company, ZRG Partners is the platform, and we've acquired 15 businesses in the last 6 years to add on to that platform, to scale the platform. So ZRG is the core, and you're adding in pieces to round out the business, give diversified revenue and growth, both organic and M&A.
And at Human, we're in the same situation as you are, Matt, with ZRG. We're the platform looking to acquire other businesses.
Exactly.
And to that note, the 3 of you are open for conversations for both sellers and buyers. Is that correct? Quick plug-in.
Sure. Yeah,
Please.
I mean, I'll speak for Jake and Matt. I know that we want people to have a good experience, right? If you're acquiring businesses, I'd love to talk to you if you're acquiring businesses. If you're a potential seller or have someone that's looking to sell, like, talk to us, because we can help you from avoiding some of the pitfalls that we've gone through in our careers. Right, Matt and Jake? You agree?
100%.
Yeah, 100%.
All right, fantastic. Well, unfortunately, we are at the end of our this has been very informative. Thank you so much, Joe, Jake, and Matt.